Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of my anatomy class. Today we are going to study the occipital bone, and this, as you can see, is the occipital bone. The occipital bone forms part of the vault of the skull, part of the base of the skull, and it also bears the foramen magnum, the opening for the passage of the medulla oblongata from the interior of the cranium down into the spinal cord. And this occipital bone, it has got a squamous part, which is the part behind the foramen magnum. It has got a basilar part in front of the foramen magnum, and it has got two condylar parts which are more or less on either side of the foramen magnum. Now let us look at the base of the skull. This is the base of the skull, and you can make out the foramen magnum here, and you can also see the occipital bone side by side for comparison. See, this is what it would look like. So you have both the occipital bones and the base of the skull, and on the base of the skull over here, this is the occipital bone, this one. So you have the occipital bone here. This is the foramen magnum. This is the basilar part of the occipital bone. These are the condylar parts of the occipital bone, and behind this is the squamous part of the occipital bone. If you turn it around like this is the squamous part of the occipital bone. This is the basilar part of the occipital bone. These are the condylar parts of the occipital bone. Let us go back to the bone itself. So again, in front of the foramen magnum, you have the squamous part of the occipital bone. And if you look at the squamous part of the occipital bone, you can make out that it has a summit over here. And from this summit or superior angle, if you go along the lateral borders, over here is a lateral angle, over here is a lateral angle, and if you go beyond the lateral angles, you come down to the condylar parts, from the lateral angle to the condylar part, from the lateral angle to the condylar part. So these lateral borders have a superolateral part from the summit or the superior angle to the lateral angle, and it has an inferolateral part from the lateral angle to the condylar part, from the superior angle to the lateral angle to the condylar part. Now this superolateral, or this portion of the lateral border, articulates with the posterior border of the parietal bone. So posterior border of the parietal bone, posterior border of the parietal bone, and this is the parietal border. And from the lateral angle to the condylar part, this articulates with the mastoid part of the temporal bone. So mastoid part of the temporal bone, mastoid part of the temporal bone. So parietal border, mastoid border, parietal border, mastoid border. Let's take a look at the parietal bone. This is the parietal bone, and this is the posterior border of the parietal bone. This one, this is the posterior border of the parietal bone, and it is this border that you have to attempt to fit with the occipital bone, and it would come to this point somewhere like this. This is the articulation then between the parietal bone and the occipital bone over here. And now the mastoid border, this mastoid border over here, the mastoid border over here. Let us take the temporal bone. Here we have the temporal bone with us, and on this temporal bone you have a squamous part, mastoid part, you have the petrous part, and styloid process, which you can't see, it's broken. It was somewhere here, it's broken. But this is the mastoid border of mastoid part of the temporal bone, and this is the posterior border of the mastoid, and it is this border which we have to articulate with the occipital bone. So let's try it. So here, this is the articulation between the mastoid border of the temporal bone and the mastoid border of the occipital bone. So here you have an occipitomastoid suture. Now what about this suture? What about this suture with the parietal bone? So with the two parietal bones, this complete suture is called the lambdoid suture because it is shaped like the letter lambda, Greek letter lambda, so it's lambdoid suture. And as you know, sutural joints, they are a variation of fibrous joints. So this particular suture, the lambdoid suture, is called a denticulate suture because the serrated margins of this border are peg like and tooth like, and they are interlocking. Another important thing about the lambdoid suture is that within the lambdoid suture you are likely to have extra bones, sutural bones or Warmian bones, and you can make out this Warmian bone over here. This is an extra bone totally trapped within the mastoid, within the lambdoid suture. So here you have a Warmian bone or a sutural bone within the lambdoid suture. And if you take the parietal bone again, the one that I showed you, even on the parietal bone here you can make out this extra bone in the lambdoid suture. In fact, there are two here. This is one, and you can make out that this is actually a denticulate suture, that these serrations, these pegs, they are interlocking. So you have these small sutural bones or Warmian bones. Coming back to the squamous part of the occipital bone, it has got an internal surface over here which faces the interior of the cranium, and it has got an external surface. This one is the external surface and this one is the internal surface. Now if you look at the external surface, you will find that somewhere in the middle of the superior angle and the margin of the foramen magnum you have an elevation, this one. This elevation is called the external occipital protuberance, and from this elevation you have a ridge running down to the posterior margin of the foramen magnum. This is called the external occipital crest. So external occipital protuberance, external occipital crest. From this external occipital protuberance you have a pair of curved lines extending outwards towards the parietal bone and curving down towards the mastoid like this. Here you can see curving down towards the parietal and the mastoid parts. These are the superior nuchal lines, and midway along the external occipital crest you can see another pair of curved lines. These are the inferior nuchal lines. So external occipital protuberance, external occipital crest, superior nuchal lines, inferior nuchal lines. Not only that, somewhat above the superior nuchal lines you can make out another faint pair of curved lines. These are the highest nuchal lines. So highest nuchal lines, superior nuchal lines, inferior nuchal lines, external occipital protuberance, external occipital crest. Now these highest nuchal lines, they give attachment to a structure called the epicranial aponeurosis. That means it is one of the tough aponeurosis which forms a protective layer over the vault of the skull and is part of the scalp tissue. So you have the epicranial aponeurosis attached here, and this epicranial aponeurosis has got a muscular front part and a muscular rear part. Into this epicranial aponeurosis is attached the occipitalis and the frontalis. They are muscles having double bellies. So you have two bellies, the occipital bellies, and you have two frontal bellies, of which the occipital belly of the occipitofrontalis is also attached here on the highest nuchal line. So epicranial aponeurosis, occipital belly of the occipitofrontalis, that is the attachment over here. Now the superior nuchal lines. These superior nuchal lines actually form a junction between the head and the neck. So the head neck junction technically is at the superior nuchal line. That means above the external occipital protuberance you are going into the scalp, and so all of this is more or less palpable through the scalp, but below the superior nuchal line you are into the neck. So this remaining part is not palpable because it is covered by the heavy neck muscles. Now because the beginning of the neck is from here, from the superior nuchal line, you have the attachment of the investing layer of the deep cervical fossa, which is the deep fossa of the neck. It is attached to the superior nuchal lines. Not only that, at the superior nuchal line you have muscle attachments. To the medial 1/3 over here you have the attachment of the trapezius, and to the lateral half over here you have the attachment of the sternocleidomastoid, and below that to the splenius capitis. So trapezius, sternocleidomastoid, splenius capitis. In the area between the superior nuchal line and the inferior nuchal line, medially you have the large attachment of the semispinalis capitis, and laterally you have a smaller muscle, the superior oblique. So semispinalis capitis, superior oblique, and you have trapezius, sternocleidomastoid, splenius capitis. Now in between the inferior nuchal line and the margin of the foramen magnum, you have two muscles over here. Medially you have the rectus capitis posterior minor, laterally you have the rectus capitis posterior major. So again, epicranial aponeurosis, occipital belly of occipitofrontalis, trapezius, sternocleidomastoid, splenius capitis, semispinalis capitis, superior oblique, rectus capitis posterior minor, rectus capitis posterior major, and you have reached the margin of the foramen magnum. To the margin of the foramen magnum you have the attachment of the posterior atlanto-occipital membrane. So posterior atlanto-occipital membrane to the margin of the foramen magnum. So this is more or less what you have to know about the posterior surface of the squamous part of the occipital bone. Let us now go to the inner surface. This is the inner surface of the squamous part of the occipital bone, and like the external occipital protuberance, you have over here an internal occipital protuberance. Going down from the internal occipital protuberance you have the internal occipital crest, and you can make out that this crest, when it has gone to the margin of the foramen magnum, it has divided, leaving a flat triangular patch over here which is called the Vermian fossa. It is related to the inferior vermis of the cerebellum. The cerebellum therefore has both a superior vermis and it also has an inferior vermis. So the inferior vermis of the cerebellum will be related to this region, to the Vermian fossa. So internal occipital protuberance, internal occipital crest, external occipital protuberance, external occipital crest. Now this prominence of the external occipital protuberance is also called the inion. It's one of the anthropological markers for the study of the skull. Anyway, back to the inner surface. Internal occipital protuberance, internal occipital crest, and the Vermian fossa. And at the internal occipital protuberance you can make out this cruciate or cross-like arrangement of structures. Passing above you have the sagittal sulcus. There is a depression in the middle bounded by two elevations. This is a groove. This groove is the sagittal sulcus. The margins of the sagittal sulcus give attachment to the falx cerebri. The falx cerebri is a fold of meninges. It's a fold of the meningeal layer of the dura mater. It's a dural fold actually, and it's a sickle shaped dural fold, the attached margin of which is attached to the margins of this sulcus, superior sagittal sulcus. So you have a superior sagittal sulcus, the margins of which give attachment to the falx cerebri, and within the layers of the falx cerebri over here you have the superior sagittal sinus. It's a venous sinus. So a venous sinus, superior sagittal sinus, is attached to lies along the attached margin of the falx cerebri, and the membranes of the falx cerebri are attached to these margins of the superior sagittal sulcus. From the internal occipital protuberance again you have two transverse grooves. This is the transverse sulcus on the right side, on the left side and on the right side. The transverse sulcus, it's broader than the superior sagittal sulcus. The margins of the transverse sulcus give attachment to the tentorium cerebelli. It's a tent-like structure. It is also a meningeal fold. It's a dura mater fold. It's a fold of the meningeal layer of the dura mater. And the tentorium cerebelli, the fixed margin of the tentorium cerebelli is attached along the margins of the transverse sulcus, and in between the attachments, in between the split attachments of the tentorium cerebelli, you have the transverse sinus. So you have the left transverse sinus, you have the right transverse sinus, and you can make out that this superior sagittal sulcus, it is actually leading into the right transverse sinus. You look at this part over here, the superior sagittal sulcus leads into the right transverse sinus, and the left transverse sinus seems to have come out of its own. But however, there is a communication over here between the right and left transverse sinuses. In fact, the superior sagittal sinus and the right and left transverse sinus, they all communicate at this point. It's called the confluence of the sinuses. So it is obvious that the superior sagittal sinus has mostly contributed to the right transverse sinus, and there is another sinus over here that is called the straight sinus. The straight sinus is at the junction of the falx cerebri and the tentorium cerebelli, and the straight sinus is more or less continuous with the left transverse sinus, and extending below from this junction you have what is called the occipital venous sinus. So this occipital venous sinus passes down, and to the internal occipital crest you have the attachment of the falx cerebelli. So the falx cerebri is a meningeal fold, it's a dural fold which passes between the two halves of the brain, that is between the two cerebral hemispheres, and the falx cerebelli passes between the two cerebellar hemispheres. So you have superior sagittal sinus, right transverse sinus, left transverse sinus, and the occipital venous sinus, and the confluence of the sinuses. Now above this cross over here you have two triangular areas. These are coming in relation to the occipital poles of the brain. So these are the cerebral fossae for the occipital lobes of the brain, and below you have two quadrangular areas which are coming in relation to the cerebellar hemispheres. So these are the cerebellar fossa over here. So cerebral fossa for the occipital lobes, occipital poles, cerebellar fossa, superior sagittal sinus, right transverse sinus, left transverse sinus, occipital venous sinus, falx cerebri, tentorium cerebelli, falx cerebelli, Warmian fossa, inferior vermis of the cerebellum. So now you have covered the inner surface of the squamous part of the occipital bone. Now we shall go into the basilar part of the occipital bone, followed by the condylar parts of the occipital bone. Now if you look at the basilar part of the occipital bone, it has got an anterior surface over here, it has got a superior surface, it has got an inferior surface, and it has got two lateral margins. First let us look at the anterior surface of the basilar part of the occipital bone. As a whole, you know, in anatomical position of the occipital bone, you have to keep the foramen magnum horizontal. Therefore you have to hold the occipital bone like this. If you hold the occipital bone in anatomical position with the foramen magnum horizontal, then the squamous part of the occipital bone will be more or less vertical, and the condylar parts will be on the two sides over here, but the basilar part has got an upward slope like this. So the basilar part is basically sloping, it's not horizontal. So if you hold the foramen magnum horizontally, the basilar part has an upward slope. So you should keep that in mind. The anterior surface of the basilar part of the occipital bone will articulate with the posterior surface of the body of the sphenoid. This is the sphenoid bone over here, and this is the body of the sphenoid, and this is the posterior surface of the body of the sphenoid. It is this part over here which will articulate with the basilar part of the occipital bone. You try for the articulation. Let's see if we can join them together. And here we have the joint. So you have basilar part of the occipital bone basilar part of the sphenoid, basisphenoid, basioccipital, and this continuous slope that we have created from the posterior surface of the body of the sphenoid to the superior surface of the basilar part of the occipital bone. This slope is called the clevus. This slope is the clevus, and over here will lie the pons and medulla oblongata of the brain and the vertebral arteries joining to form the basilar artery and a basilar plexus of veins. So these are the structures which are related to the clevus: the pons, the medulla oblongata, the fourth parts of the vertebral arteries joining to form the basilar artery, and the basilar plexus of veins. So you have an anterior surface which articulates with the body of the sphenoid, the posterior surface of the body of the sphenoid, forming the what is called primary cartilaginous joint, occipitosphenoidal synchondrosis. Here on the base of the skull you can see the clevus. You can see this part, it belongs to the basilar part of the occipital bone, and this part, it belongs to the body of the sphenoid, and there is a smooth transition. This primary cartilaginous joint between the sphenoid, basisphenoid, and the basiocciput, this is usually separated by a patch of cartilage, and this ossifies by around 25 years of age. So this is the clevus. Again, let's go back to the occipital bone. So on the occipital bone, the basilar part of the occipital bone, this was the superior surface, this was the anterior surface. Superior surface related to the pons, medulla, basilar artery, the fourth parts of the vertebral artery, and the basilar venous plexus. The anterior surface articulating with the body of the sphenoid to form a primary cartilaginous joint, ossifying by 25 years of age. Let us go to the lower surface of the basilar part of the occipital bone. On the lower surface you can make out a prominence over here. This prominence over here is called the pharyngeal tubercle, and this pharyngeal tubercle gives attachment to the fibrous raphe of the constrictor muscles of the pharynx. You know that there are three constrictor muscles of the pharynx: superior constrictor, middle constrictor, and inferior constrictor, three pairs, and all of them have posteriorly a common fibrous raphe. That fibrous raphe is attached here to the pharyngeal tubercle. That means in front over here you have the roof of the nasopharynx. So in situ on the body, the roof of the nasopharynx will be here. The pharyngeal muscles will come to a common raphe over here, and here you have the posterior wall of the pharynx. Because you have the posterior wall of the pharynx somewhere here, you have the inner covering fascia of the pharynx and the outer covering fascia of the pharynx. The inner covering fascia of the pharynx is also called the pharyngobasilar fascia. The outer covering fascia of the pharynx is called the buccopharyngeal fascia. So where you have the pharyngeal tubercle, in front you will have the pharyngobasilar fascia, behind you will have the buccopharyngeal fascia, and still behind you have what is called the prevertebral layer of the deep cervical fascia. So the deep cervical fascia has got three layers: investing layer, pretracheal layer, prevertebral layer, and the investing layer and the prevertebral layer both have their attachments on the occipital bone. You have already seen that the investing layer of the deep cervical fascia is attached to the superior nuchal lines over here, and the prevertebral layer of the deep cervical fascia is attached behind the pharyngeal tubercle over here. And then on the two sides of the pharyngeal tubercle you have the attachment of the muscle called the longus capitis. So you have longus coeli and you have the longus capitis. The longus coeli attached to the cervical vertebra, the longus coeli longus capitis attached to the cervical vertebra as well as to the occipital bone. So you have longus capitis over here, and still laterally you have depressions where you have the attachments of the muscle rectus capitis anterior. So you have four recti muscles in the neck, you have four recti muscles in the eyeball also, but these recti are different. In the neck you have rectus capitis anterior, you have rectus capitis lateralis, you have rectus capitis posterior minor, you have rectus capitis posterior major, of which you have already studied rectus capitis posterior minor, rectus capitis posterior major over here. Now over here you have the rectus capitis anterior. So you have rectus capitis anterior over here. Rectus capitis lateralis will lie at these points on the jugular process. We will come to that later. So rectus capitis anterior, rectus capitis lateralis, rectus capitis posterior minor, rectus capitis posterior major. So this is the inferior surface of the basilar part of the occipital bone. Now you look at the lateral margins of this basilar part of the occipital bone. These lateral margins articulate with the petrous part of the temporal bone. Now the petrous part of the temporal bone is triangular or prismatic, and it has got a superior border, it has an anterior border, and it has a posterior border. Let us look at it once again. This is the petrous part of the temporal bone, and you can make out that it has got a superior border over here, it has an anterior border, a short anterior border over here, and it has quite a long posterior border. This is the posterior border. So it is this medial end of the posterior border that is going to come in contact with the basilar part of the occipital bone. Let's try to join them together. You have the basilar part of the occipital bone over here, and you have the temporal bone. So here we have managed to join them. So you can see the lateral side of the basilar part of the temporal bone, of the occipital bone over here, and over here this is the petrous part of the temporal bone. This is the posterior border of the petrous part of the temporal bone, and its medial part, it articulates with the lateral margin of the basilar part of the occipital bone. And you can make out that there is another articulation over here. Somewhere here there is another point of contact between the condylar part of the occipital bone and the petrous part of the temporal, but we are not going into the condylar part right now. We are still fixed to the basilar part. So on the sides of the basilar part here you can find that there is a point of attachment, and this point of attachment has got a groove above it, a shallow groove, and along this groove you have the inferior petrosal sinus. So if you have an inferior petrosal sinus, you also have a superior petrosal sinus. The superior petrosal sinus passes along this edge of the petrous temporal, and the inferior petrosal sinus passes along this groove over the suture or the joint between the basilar part of the occipital bone and the petrous part of the temporal bone. And this inferior petrosal sinus is going to drop down into this gap. This gap over here is the jugular foramen. So it is actually going to drop into this gap over here, the jugular foramen. So the inferior petrosal sinus, after a short course here, is going to drop into this jugular foramen. So you can see the jugular foramen. I think yes, this bluish slit that you have over here is the jugular foramen, and the inferior petrosal sinus is going to drop through into this jugular foramen. So now more or less you know a lot about the basilar part of the occipital bone. You know that it has a superior surface, it has an inferior surface, it has an anterior surface, and it has two lateral borders. But what about this posterior surface? The posterior surface, the posterior margin of the basilar part of the occipital bone forms the anterior margin of the foramen magnum, and it gives attachment to the anterior atlanto-occipital membrane. Now you have anterior atlanto-occipital membrane here, you have posterior atlanto-occipital membrane here, and what remains is on this superior surface of the basilar part of the occipital bone you have a set of further attachments. We have already said that this surface is related to the pons, medulla, terminal parts of the vertebral artery, basilar artery, and basilar plexus of veins. In addition, you have a series of structures arising from the spine and getting attached to the floor over here on the basilar part. What are those structures? From the tip of the axis, or from the odontoid process of the axis, you have apical ligament dropping down to this surface from the tip of the odontoid process. So you have apical ligament, and you know that from the transverse ligament of the atlas, you have a superior band and an inferior band of the cruciate ligaments. So the superior band of the cruciate ligament, that will be dropping, coming up and dropping over the floor here. So apical ligament coming and dropping on the floor. Behind it, superior crus of cruciate ligament coming and dropping on the floor, and still behind, the membrana tectoria, which is coming up through the foramen magnum and dropping on the basilar part of the occipital bone. So from behind forwards, apical ligament, superior crus of the cruciate ligament, and membrana tectoria. Apical ligament, superior crus of cruciate ligament, membrana tectoria. These three things. The apical ligament coming from the tip of the odontoid process of the axis, the superior crus of the cruciate ligament coming up from the transverse ligament of the atlas, and the membrana tectoria, which is a continuation of the posterior longitudinal ligament coming up from the body of the axis. So more or less now we are through with the basilar part of the occipital bone, and now we are into the condylar parts of the occipital bone. If you look at the condylar parts of the occipital bone from below, immediately what comes to the eye is the condyles of the occipital bone. So these are the condyles of the occipital bone. These articulate with the superior facets on the atlas, and you can make out that these condyles are converging anteriorly, and because they are articulating with the superior facets of the atlas, they may occasionally be bean shaped or kidney shaped, or may even be split into two. So these are the condyles of the condylar parts of the occipital bone bearing the articular facets to form the atlanto-occipital joint, which is a synovial joint. So the margins give attachment to the capsule of the synovial joint. To the medial parts of these articular, to these condyles of the occipital bone, over here you can see slight prominences, and these prominences are meant for the alar ligaments. So you know, from the sides of the odontoid process of the axis, you have a pair of alar ligaments. So the alar ligaments diverge and get attached to the prominences here on the medial surfaces or inner surfaces of the condyles of the occipital bone, just above the articular facets over here. So the condylar parts of the occipital bone bearing the condyles and the articular facets, and behind the condyles, behind the articular facets, there is a depression, the postcondylar fossa. It takes up the superior facets of the atlas when there is extension of the neck. So the posterior ends of the facets, articular processes of the atlas, they will lodge here, and occasionally you have a condylar foramen here. In on one side you can make out there is a condylar foramen. Over here there is a condylar foramen. So this condylar foramen gives rise to an emissary vein occasionally connecting with the internal venous sinuses over here. You can see the emergence of the condylar foramen over here. So this condylar fossa occasionally having a condylar foramen, and there is no condylar foramen, at least not a large one on this side. And you have these condyles of the occipital bone, they also have a medial surface, a medial edge, they have a lateral surface over here. So it has an upper surface, it has a lower surface, it has an upper surface, it has a lateral margin, it has a medial margin. To the medial margins, we have already said you have the attachments of the alar ligaments. Now these lateral margins of the condyles, they are free anteriorly, and laterally these margins end in the jugular process. So this quadrangular piece of bone over here, this jugular process, it's at the lateral end of the condylar process. So jugular process, and again a free margin. Now we already know that this is the position of the jugular foramen. There is an attachment here to the petrous part of the temporal bone, and there is an attachment here at the jugular process to the petrous part of the temporal bone, and in between this portion is free, it's forming the boundary of the jugular foramen. Let us join the temporal bone again to the lateral side of the condyles and see what it looks like. So once again we have joined the temporal bone with the occipital bone, and you can make out that there is a point of attachment here. We have already said the basilar part of the temporal bone articulates here with the position of the inferior petrosal sinus, and in the middle there is this gap for the jugular foramen, which is wider laterally and narrower medially, and posteriorly the jugular foramen is closed by this jugular process, and this hook like area of the jugular process is called the jugular notch. So the jugular notch actually closes the jugular foramen from behind, and the lateral end of the jugular process over here articulates with a similar patch on the temporal bone. You can make out that on the temporal bone, on the lateral end of the posterior border, here there is a patch on the petrous temporal for articulation with the lateral end of the jugular process over here. So this lateral end of the jugular process will articulate with the lateral end of the petrous temporal inferior border, posterior border, and it will complete the jugular foramen. This is the jugular foramen. The medial end of the jugular foramen is narrow and it gives passage to the inferior petrosal sinus, and the lateral end of the jugular foramen is wide. It gives passage to the sigmoid sinus over here, and the sigmoid sinus descends to form the superior bulb of the internal jugular vein. So this inferior petrosal sinus is also going down and draining into the internal jugular vein, and the sigmoid sinus is curving down over this groove and again forming the superior bulb of the internal jugular vein. And in between the inferior petrosal sinus and the sigmoid sinus descending to form the internal jugular vein, you have the 9th, 10th and 11th cranial nerves, that is the glossopharyngeal, vagus and accessory nerves. These three nerves are passing in the middle part of the jugular foramen. So inferior petrosal sinus, 9th, 10th, 11th cranial nerves, and sigmoid sinus going on to become the internal jugular vein. These are the structures passing through the jugular foramen, and in addition you can have emissary veins connecting the sigmoid sinus with the plexuses of veins below, with the pterygoid venous plexus and other plexuses of veins below. So the lateral edges of these condylar parts are very important because they are forming the boundaries of the jugular foramen. Now the lateral most part of the condylar parts of the occipital bone, we have said they are ending in this jugular process, and the anterior surface of the jugular process forms the jugular notch, where you have the posterior end of the jugular foramen, and the lateral surface has got a patch for articulation with the petrous temporal. The superior surface of the jugular process has got this groove for the sigmoid sinus. So this transverse sinus over here, it will go on onto the temporal bone and descend to form the sigmoid sinus. So from the transverse sinus you have the sigmoid sinus, and towards the end the sigmoid sinus will groove the jugular process and descend down through the jugular foramen to become the superior bulb of the internal jugular vein. Now on the superior surface of the condylar part over here, you can make out the tubercle. This is called the jugular tubercle, and behind the jugular tubercle there is a shallow depression. This depression is for the passage of the 9th, 10th and 11th cranial nerves, that is glossopharyngeal, vagus and accessory nerves, before they descend into the jugular foramen. So 9th, 10th, 11th cranial nerves going down. Now what about the 12th cranial nerve? The hypoglossal nerve has got a hypoglossal canal of its own, and it passes through the condylar part. So this condylar part of the occipital bone is actually perforated by the hypoglossal canal, which starts on the inner surface and exits on the outer surface. Let us see if we can. So here you have the hypoglossal canal. You can make out the hypoglossal canal over here. See the hypoglossal canal. So on the inner surface, just below the jugular tubercle, you have the hypoglossal canal. The inner opening is somewhere here. This is the inner opening, and over here you have the outer opening, the outer opening of the hypoglossal canal. So the inner opening of the hypoglossal canal and the outer opening of the hypoglossal canal, it is pointing outwards and slightly laterally. So the hypoglossal nerve will pass out through this hypoglossal canal. So now you have 9th, 10th, 11th cranial nerves on top and the 12th cranial nerve, the hypoglossal nerve, from below. So these are the nerves that are related to the condylar part of the occipital bone. And now, apart from these nerves, you also have the second and third cervical nerves. They are related to the squamous part of the occipital bone, but we are not going to its details right now. Now, if you look at the foramen magnum as a whole, on the foramen magnum, here you have the anterior atlanto-occipital membrane. Posteriorly, here you have the posterior atlanto-occipital membrane. Over here you have the attachment of the alar ligaments, and from below, poking its head up slightly, is the odontoid process of the axis with its apical ligament, superior cross of the cruciate ligament, and membrana tectoria. Now attached to the margins of the foramen magnum is the first tooth of the ligamentum denticulatum, which is one of the protective ligaments of the spinal cord. So the highest tooth of the ligamentum denticulatum is attached here. And in front of the ligamentum denticulatum, you have the rise of the vertebral artery from below. So vertebral artery arises from here. Behind the ligamentum denticulatum, you have the spinal part of the accessory nerve. They are coming up. So through the foramen ligament coming up, you have the vertebral artery and the spinal accessory nerve, and going down are the anterior and posterior spinal arteries. So you have one anterior spinal artery, you have two posterior spinal arteries. They are going down through the foramen magnum, and coming up through the foramen magnum are the vertebral artery and the spinal accessory nerve. So the spinal accessory nerve will come up like this, join with the cranial accessory over the jugular tubercle, and pass down into the jugular foramen, and then again the spinal part and the cranial part will separate. The cranial part of the accessory will join the vagus, and the spinal part of the accessory will go into the posterior triangle. So these are more or less the structures passing through the foramen magnum. And of course you have the medulla oblongata itself with its covering meninges and the surrounding basilar plexus of Haynes over here. As far as ossification is concerned, you have two centers for the upper part of the squamous, two centers for the lower part of the squamous, two for the condylar parts, one for the basilar part, and occasionally one for the posterior margin of the foramen magnum. I think that's all for now. If you have any difficulties, you can contact me on WhatsApp. Thank you.